Welcome back, MFU listeners. We thank you very much for tuning in. So we have something important to share with you today before we dive into the conversation. We often find ourselves entangled in the web of societal expectations, these perfect bodies we're striving for, these extravagant trips, and these designer labels, all sorts of things. There's a lot. But today we want to pause and reflect on the beauty of imperfection. Life isn't always smooth sailing, and neither is podcasting. So during the recording of this very episode, we faced some technical difficulties. It was tempting for us to start over, to re-record and deliver a flawless show. But then we had a moment of clarity thanks to our wonderful guest, Mel. We consulted with our guest and together both agreed that we will side with being authentic rather than perfect. So Mel, in all her wisdom and vulnerability, reminded us of the essence of our podcast. It's about being authentic. It's about being genuine. And I guess how can we claim to be champions of self-awareness over here and challengers of societal expectations if we ourselves strive for an unattainable standard of perfection? We're human, and after all, our stories are real. So I won't lie to you, the audio in this episode is not going to be perfect, but what matters more is the message and the vulnerability and the beauty of sharing these difficult experiences. Our guest, Mel, has graciously opened up about her own journey, and I assure you it's worth hearing. So, lovely listeners, we invite you to join us on this imperfect journey today. We understand if you decide to step away from this episode, but sincerely hope you choose to stay. Embrace the rawness and the glitches and the humanness that comes with it. So let's explore the depths of these shared experiences together. Thanks. Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. Today I'm so honored to have Melissa Johnston joining us. Melissa is not only a talented graphics designer with Melissa Ray Creative, but she also has a very powerful story to share about her personal experience with the healthcare system. Specifically, I'm really excited to have Melissa come on and shed some light on the challenges that she's faced while having to advocate for herself within the medical system, particularly in the Lower Mainland in British Columbia. So without further ado, I'm really excited to welcome Melissa. So thank you so much for joining us today. Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thank you so much for having me, Kieran. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, I wanted to share that when we had our pre-call to prep for this episode, for the recording, you shared your story. You were great. You shared your whole story. So I really got a sense of what's been going on for you in the last year and a half. And I just remember sitting on the other end of the call with my jaw wide open because I think when I hung up, I was processing your story and just imagining what that must have been like for you. But also, it's really sad because unfortunately your story reflects a broader issue that many people across North America are, I'm so sad to say, but like familiar with this failing state. Sometimes it feels like of our healthcare systems. And I don't know about you, but like on one hand, I feel you hear so many stories where people are not getting what they need or finding out too late. And you're going to talk today about what happened with you. And this is nothing to do with our healthcare professionals. I'm very grateful that we have professionals that helped us through COVID, let alone still being here to serve us. But I feel guilty because I know there's people outside of North America and other countries that don't have a healthcare system. So what we have, on one hand, you're like, well, I'm blessed with because I will get seen eventually. However, there's people across the world that don't have access to anything. And so it's this weird place to be in. And so I don't I don't know what we're going to do, what's going to happen with the healthcare system, but I know that having someone like you on today will give us an opportunity to just talk about what you're going through, and if anything, maybe feel like you have a voice or support someone on the other end that's listening while either they're taking care of a loved one or they themselves are experiencing issues. And it's like, can we talk about this? Because we may not be able to change certain outcomes, but processing it together may help. Please start with talking and let's see what happens. So thank you for coming on and talking today.
Thank you so much. I think you're totally right when you talk about it's not the healthcare professionals themselves, because they're amazing. It's just the institution of the process of how you get yourself put in front of these healthcare professionals that I think that is the bigger issue here.
I would agree. That's very well said. I feel like it may be a heavy topic. I'm not sure today. I will try to bring a sense of humor, and I've had a really good chat with you beforehand, so I feel like the energy is really good in the room. So thanks again for coming on this evening. And I thought, okay, before we delve into it, because it's going to be hard to pause at some point, why don't we start with the middle finger segment? So I'm curious, what did you bring today?
I think that I want to put my middle finger up to not feeling heard in regards to the medical system. I mean, that's something that I really experienced within the last year. So that's really heavy on my heart.
When I'm with you, I'm going to like wave my stupid one that I brought, because it's just like not like, how do I follow that? So I agree with you. I'm going to put my middle fingers up to that. I was talking to a really good friend over the weekend who was sort of telling me how his sister's been going through some healthcare issues, and just how frustrating it is as a loved one watching your family member go through this, and also as the loved one, what it is that they're processing and going through, because it's like, oh, I wish, she would call faster to get on that wait list or what. And so we were both talking about how it's so hard because you feel helpless. However, what must it be like for that person that has to book these appointments, make these calls, keep track of things, take certain meds? It's a crappy place to be. So I'm going to join you and put my middle fingers up to that too.
Appreciate the support.
Yeah. Can we, I'm really curious. So I want you to share sort of your journey. Like maybe you can work backwards from, because today you're talking about being diagnosed with colitis, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
This was a diagnosis that I waited approximately just under a year to get, and to even know what was going on with me. I know we kind of talked about my story in our pre-call, and it's quite a long one, but I think a lot of the points are really important to me, especially all the different points along the way where I felt that, my husband and I had to advocate for, my own medical help and what that looked like for us. And when you speak about, eventually getting to be put in front of healthcare professionals, that's the thing. Like, why do we have to wait months, years just to get, like, if we have a problem today, why do we have to wait so long to get seen about it? Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. So I'll kind of start at the very beginning. I gave birth to my daughter last May. So during my pregnancy, I started noticing a lot of blood in my stool, which can be quite normal for people. It can be hemorrhoids, which is very common in pregnancy. And as you know, they can't really do any invasive testing while you're pregnant unless it's going to be harming you or the baby. And at this point, it wasn't something that was a red flag where my OB wanted to do any diagnosis on that. So that kind of got laid to bed. I gave birth, everything was fine. I would say about 6 weeks after I gave birth, I started experiencing extreme urgency when I was going to the washroom, to the point of I'd be breastfeeding my daughter and I'd have to run to the washroom. Like, I'd have to hand her off to my husband, run to the washroom, do what I need to do, and then go back and feed my daughter. Those were, I know, I apologize, we're going to be talking about a lot of poo on the podcast today. That's something that a lot of people... it's something that a lot of people don't want to talk about. A lot of people are embarrassed about. But that's a huge indicator that there may be something wrong with your health if you're not having normal bowel movement. So that's something that I also think is important, that people take the opportunity to kind of evaluate and say, if there is something wrong, I should talk to a doctor about it.
And sometimes it's just hard to even know, is there something wrong, because you might be experiencing certain bowel movements a certain way for a period of time, and you think, well, that's normal for me, until maybe you mention it to a friend and they're like, that's not normal. So sometimes it's even hard to know what the indicator is. But for you, while you're breastfeeding, you're having this, I guess at that point you're like, this isn't something that happens all the time for you, right?
No, no, and throughout all of my life, like I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 22 years ago, and I've dealt with gluten and wheat sensitivity, dairy sensitivity. I've always had kind of digestive issues, but never to this extent. And I've absolutely had never experienced blood in my stool before, so that was something that was completely new to me, and that wasn't my baseline. So when, the hemorrhoids, that was something that I, brought up with some of my girlfriends. Like you say, you bring it up, and it didn't, some of my girlfriends had experienced this in pregnancy, and that was not something that, it wasn't normal.
Yeah.
Didn't sound like what they had experienced. So when I brought this up with my GP, she kind of looked at me and I explained my whole story. She sent me for blood work and said, oh, it's most likely hemorrhoids, so I have to send you to see a specialist. Well, this was in July. I had to wait until November to get an appointment with the specialist. And unfortunately, in that time period, my symptoms increased drastically, where I was, rushing to the bathroom 10 to 12 times a day. I was having excruciating cramps. At some points, they'd be comparable to labor pains. Like, they were really, really, really bad. And
wait, but like 10 to 12 times a day?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know I'm working on not interrupting, but I wanted to make sure I heard that right.
No, please do. So it's crazy, the whole story, and especially for someone like myself that didn't, we now know it was ulcerative colitis. I had no clue what IBS was, which is irritable bowel syndrome. I'd only ever heard of IBS, so I didn't know, there wasn't enough education around, what this disease is and what it entails for a green light to go off in my head and be like, this is what it is.
So sorry, are you saying, can you just, sorry, so there's IBS, but you're talking about IB what?
IBD.
IBD.
So it's irritable bowel disease.
And there's a difference, right?
So IBS is actually, from my understanding, and please note, like, anyone who's listening to this, I'm not a healthcare professional. This is just, what I've done.
Yeah.
What I've learned through my journey. So IBS is triggered by foods, so different kind of foods. A lot of people with IBS have dairy triggers, gluten triggers, and that kind of what puts them. You'll see a lot of people suffer with bloating or diarrhea.
Right.
With IBD, it's actually triggered by environmental factors. So stress is a massive one. In my case, it was triggered by, the doctors believe it was triggered by the sudden influx of hormones during my pregnancy. So it could have been something, that I've dealt with my entire life, but it never really came to the forefront until that point in my health journey. Yeah, so a lot of, not something that I could have done to stop, not something that I could have done to change, very much like type 1 diabetes, where your body your immune system just starts attacking itself. And unfortunately, autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes and IBD, they love friends. So a lot of times if you have one, most likely down the road in your life.
Oh, interesting.
Another one. Yeah.
Okay, there's a link. Yeah, and you said, because earlier you said you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes like quite a few years ago, right? And you wouldn't have experienced these hormonal things you're saying, and literally until you were pregnant.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay. So back to what you were saying. So you're talking to friends and then you're finding out about IBD.
Yep. I actually didn't know it was IBD or what IBD was at this point. I started having, outside of, the cramping and washroom trips, I started having these other health symptoms. So I would have reoccurring mouth ulcers. I started getting really terrible rashes under my eyes. Wow. I started experiencing really painful lumps in my armpit, which all these things started happening. I had kind of a thought in my head that, this seems too coincidental for this all to be happening, and it's not connected by any chance. So I went to my naturopath, and I see her quite frequently, and she had, I think this was in September or October, probably October, closer to when I actually went to the hemorrhoid specialist. She mentioned, Mel, you brought up all of these symptoms to me. Have you ever heard of IBD? Because I think that's most likely what you're experiencing. And so we started kind of doing a little bit more research into IBD, how you can, you get into a flare up, you have to get into remission. A lot of times you get into remission with heavy steroid dose, and once you're in remission, you can kind of work out a food diet that will help keep you in remission, as well as the biggest thing for people with IBD, so Crohn's or colitis, is, living a stress-free life. And as a new mom, you probably can relate, like, it's just stressful. That's just a little side note about, IBD stuff. So after my naturopath kind of brought this up, I ended up seeing this hemorrhoid specialist, and he took one look at me, did his exam and said, it's not hemorrhoids. It's very highly likely IBD, but we can't diagnose it without a colonoscopy. So there's no medicine we can give you until then. And trying to get into a colonoscopy in BC is like, it's difficult. It's very difficult. I ended up, this was in November. I spoke with a GI office in December, and I was on a wait list for a colonoscopy, and I didn't end up actually getting an official date till the end of January.
And this started in May. So you're already like 7 months in.
March of 2022.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this is, as time moves on, the inflammation starts taking over, and I only learned this, after I've been through this entire experience. The inflammation takes over quite rapidly without treatment. So in that time, I started losing a lot of weight, not having an appetite. My iron was really low, so I was just fatigued all the time, nutrient deficient, because your body's not absorbing anything when you're eating it, when it's in that fight or flight state.
And were you breastfeeding too?
I was breastfeeding. I breastfed my daughter until she was 9 months.
So she's also getting a lot of these nutrients.
She was,
and that you're not.
I was taking.
Yeah.
I was just giving right to her. And I think also, we talked about this mom guilt. My husband kept pushing, maybe we should switch the formula. Maybe we should switch the formula. And there's nothing wrong with formula. Fed baby's a fed baby, but there's so much negative narrative around formula that I just was like, I can still physically breastfeed my baby. I might be exhausted, but I'm still doing it. So, I just kept going. If you're in fight or flight, you do what you need to do.
Wow. That's a lot. Kudos to you. That's all, like, honestly, kudos to you for thinking about what's in the best interest of your child. And you literally just met this child, and you're supposed to be, well, they say, I'm not sure if all moms would agree, but like, you're supposed to be enjoying this like birth. I would imagine your first baby with your husband, and you're not even talking about postpartum. I don't even know if that's happening at this point, but definitely all these other medical issues where whether you have something like postpartum or not, you're exhausted, similar symptoms. I would imagine mentally you're probably really low too, because if you don't have the nutrients and energy. So what was that like for you at that time?
It was exhausting, and it's hard for me to look back. I believe that from October of 2022 till about February of this year, that it's almost like I blocked it out because I was just trying to survive my daughter. And I look back and I almost feel guilty, because it's like, as you said, it's supposed to be the best time of your life. They're young, you get to do all these things with them, but it was almost like I wasn't able to, I didn't feel like I could be fully present with her because I was, like you said, exhausted. And so it was a very jarring time in, my husband and I's life, because not only do we have this new child, we're also trying to figure out what the fuck is wrong with me? Like, what is going on? it was a mad rush towards the end of January to get myself in front of the right medical professionals because, I was calling this GI's office every other day to try and like get bumped up on this cancellation list because at this point I had only had a 5-minute call with them. He didn't look at any of my blood work, which was all extremely indicative of inflammation, of nutrient deficiency. So there was a lot of red flags there. If somebody had looked at my charts and my blood work, and the right people.
So they didn't look at the blood work because you hadn't been in for the appointment? Like they had the information there, but because they hadn't seen you? Or should they have and they just didn't?
It was when I had talked to this GI's office.
Yeah.
It was more of like a 5-minute intake phone call to kind of diagnose if I needed a colonoscopy or not. I believe that, and I don't know if this is the process of how they do their work, but I believe that, they do the colonoscopy and assess what they've seen and then kind of diagnose it from there. And from my understanding also is that Vancouver right now is inundated with patients who have GI issues. So all of these GI offices and doctors are crazy busy. And maybe we need to get more doctors in that industry, but
yes, that's part of the problem is we need medical professionals. And I think a lot of medical professionals either took a break or may have left during or after COVID too. So we have this huge gap. So that's likely one of the things is, everyone's overworked. And so how easy these things that are potentially life-threatening to a human being, but in the system, it's like easy to miss, hey?
Exactly, and I don't want to speak poorly about healthcare professionals because they're doing amazingly hard, great people. I think it's just the system itself is so busy. Doctors. When I was in the hospital, and I know we'll get to that point in the story, you get to see the doctor once a day in the morning, and you have a very short period of time because they have to see handfuls of people.
Yeah, you're one of how many? Isn't that also sad, right? Like, wow. Yeah. So no wonder you're calling every other day.
Yeah, and not even like they're overworked as well.
Yeah.
To look at it from their perspective, they're probably exhausted. So at this point, I believe this was in January, my husband had been not pressuring me, but kind of pushing me to go into the hospital. We have some friends who she has Crohn's, and we're quite close with them, and she had followed my story, and she kept saying, now go to the hospital, tell them what's going on, they'll get you in for an emergency colonoscopy. I don't like hospitals. I'm also a very stubborn person, so I, kept putting it off, but I was like, we'll wait for the date, I've already seen all these doctors. And at this point, I think in my journey, I really learned that we're allowed to be pushy and we're allowed to advocate for ourselves. So this is kind of the beginning of where my husband and I started experiencing that, you get more out of pushing for yourself in our medical industry. So we actually did go to the hospital and we waited in emergency, got blood work done. We finally get in to see the doctor. We were going in hopes of getting an emergency colonoscopy just so we could put this to bed and hopefully move into the next chapter of our life. He took one look at my blood work and he goes, yeah, it's indicative of IBD. We can't get you in for a colonoscopy. You're just going to have to go home and wait for when your colonoscopy is scheduled. And my husband took one look at him and was like, can you not give her any fluids or anything? She's clearly not, she's ready to go. She's dramatically losing weight. And he just took one look at him and goes, yeah, I guess so. And that was kind of the end of that. We went home, we felt defeated. But I do, like I said, I think that point in our journey, we did learn from our mistakes of not being pushy enough. Fast forward 2 weeks after that, we ended up going to VGH, and
that's Vancouver General Hospital?
Yeah, the General Hospital. Their emergency department got me in right away because I had really low blood pressure at this point because I was losing so much blood. I got blood work taken. I was seen by their GI team within an hour. They were the whole staff. They're crazy busy there, but their whole staff was so amazing. They hooked me up with their GI team. I was getting prepped within like a few hours for an emergency colonoscopy the next morning. So that was, that was kind of where we're like, it was our beacon of light. And we go, okay, is this going to be the light at the end of the tunnel? We're finally going to figure out what's wrong. Probably going to have to stay here a few days, and then, we can move on to this next chapter of our life. I feel like that was kind of just the beginning of this whole experience that we had. So I ended up going for the emergency colonoscopy the next morning, which did show ulcerative colitis. So at this point, they get you out of remission out of a flare-up into remission with steroids, or the steroids called prednisone, which steroids, just a side note, is extremely bad for people with diabetes because it affects blood sugar and your body's not able to absorb the insulin. So on top of, taking these IV steroids, I'm dealing with having very high blood sugar in hospital, not feeling well on top of everything else I'm going through. But it's kind of a catch-22, right? It's a necessary evil at this point. So I ended up staying in the hospital for, I believe this hospital stay was about 8 days. We did IV steroids for a few days, and, I was responding well, so they switched me to oral steroids in preparation for my discharge. I also ended up getting a 3-day iron transfusion. So I left the hospital after those 8 days, and I was feeling great, like so much energy. I remember that week I started like rage cleaning and organizing things in the house because I just finally had this energy. I was like going to the library with my daughter. It was like, this is fucking awesome. I feel great.
Was that the first time since having your daughter you felt that way?
Yeah. Yeah. She was, I believe she was about 8, turning 9 months at this point. Yeah, she was 9 months because that's when I stopped breastfeeding, when I went into this hospital visit. So, she's at a fun age where she's exploring things. At this point, we're going to the library. She's ripping apart the shelves at the library. We're going to the parks, doing all these fun things. And in my head, I'm like, okay, this is awesome. Yeah. I'm getting my life back. These drugs are working. We can finally move into this next phase of life. But unfortunately, so I was discharged on a Sunday. On the following Saturday, things just got terrible. My symptoms increased again. I was feeling nauseous. I was not feeling well, and I think mentally, I kind of was like, here we fucking go. Like, I don't want to go back to the hospital, but in my head, like, I know that's the only way that this is going to get fixed. So at this point, I'm calling my GI's office, trying to speak with the doctor to see, like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Like, what do I do in this situation? And she kind of, said, well, if you're telling me that you're having 25 plus bowel movements again, you're up all night, which I was up all night. I kid you not. I'd be up every 15 to 20 minutes to run to the washroom. At some point, I had just brought a blanket into the washroom, and then I had to wake up in the morning and be a parent. So that it was a very, very dark 2 weeks. The following Sunday or Saturday, we did go back to BGH, and we didn't get admitted, I didn't get admitted. The emergency doctor just said, increase your steroid dose until you see your GI. Hopefully that helps. Okay, we'll try it. We'll see. But, I don't know if this is going to help because at this point, not only am I cramping, I'm exhausted. I haven't had a full night's sleep in a while. So, and also, we left because every time I went to the hospital, it was on the weekends because we didn't have childcare during the week. So it's not like, my husband works full time, so it's not like we can pick up and just go to the hospital. I don't want to bring my daughter to the hospital because there's germs everywhere. So it's, we had to be very calculated about childcare and pick the appropriate times to go. So we ended up going Things got worse again. My GI doctor said, just go back in, tell them I sent you XYZ. So we go back in the following Saturday. So at this point, this is 2 weeks between my discharge and being readmitted. At this point, we get back into the hospital. They deem me my situation terrible enough that they can, bring me back in. Because of COVID, they have to nose swab everyone who's admitted just to make sure, bringing anything into the hospital. I had over the last 2 weeks since I had started the steroids, I had a really bad cough. And the only thing that I could say it sounded like was a smoker's cough. Like it was very chesty, a lot of mucus in my chest. And I had read that that can be a side effect of the steroids. So didn't think anything of it. I am in emergency. I get whisked away to a quarantined room because I somehow caught RSV in that time.
Wow.
So not only am I quarantined, now all of a sudden these GI doctors are coming in and telling me we're going to try everything that doesn't look like surgery at this point, but your end game might be that we're going to have to move into surgery. And so, while I was up at all hours of the night, scrolling, trying to find out as much information as I could about ulcerative colitis and IBD and what that looks like for people and how they manage it long term, there was a lot of these instances that people have to get surgeries where they live with an ostomy bag. So that wasn't a huge surprise it was a surprise, but it wasn't like I had never heard that before. So mentally, I was able to sit and process okay, they're going to try everything, but it could be going to surgery. Mm-hmm. And that's, that could be my end game. Mm-hmm. So my husband and I did a ton of research around that while we waited in hospital. They tried the IV steroids to no avail. My inflammation numbers just kept rising. They did 2 rounds of biologic infusions, which, usually if people aren't responding to the steroids, the biologics is the next kind of step to move into where people are able to get relief from that and move into remission. And you're supposed to, I think usually they do it every 2 weeks. For me, they did it 1 week and then the next week. So they did it fairly close together in hopes that it was going to have some impact on my colitis. Mm-hmm. It didn't. And so at that point, they did bring in the surgical team to have conversations with me. Before my surgery, I was at BGH for the second time for 3 weeks. So it was a long 3 weeks. And in that time, I think I had only seen my daughter twice because I didn't want to bring her to the hospital. There's germs. It's dirty. She's at the stage now where she's mobile. She's wanting to crawl everywhere. I don't want her on the floors. Yeah. It's quite disgusting. So of course we'd FaceTime every night, but that mentally was very hard because at this point, things are happening very quickly for her. She said, Mama and Dada while I was in the hospital. Oh. She started waving at people, which was, super cute, but it's just not the same to experience that over FaceTime.
Yeah.
So that mentally it was hard. And like I said, my husband's he's a fucking rock star. He came in every single day, and he didn't have to do that, but he was there every single day to no avail. And a side note is that he had planned to take the remainder of his paternity leave from March 1st to May 1st.
Right.
So coincidentally, while this was all going on, he was on his pat leave, which, we had planned to go to Maui, which we had to cancel. We're going to hopefully rebook it in the next few months here.
Yeah.
But, it was supposed to be an enjoyable time for our family. And it just kind of turned this massive incident that it brought us closer together as a family because there were, with my husband and I, there was a lot of decisions that we had to make together. Ultimately, I was the one who made the decisions, but going through pros and cons list in terms of, what surgery I wanted to go with. If surgery was the right option, do I want to keep trial and erroring drugs. And while I'm trial and erroring these other drugs, I have to stay in the hospital.
Right.
And if they don't work, I have to go for surgery anyways. So there was a lot of things that we talked about. You know, the doctors came in every morning. We asked them a bunch of questions. We asked to speak with the surgeons. We asked to speak with the anesthesiologist to ask, like, what does this look like? What are challenges that people face after these types of surgeries? You know, there are two different types of surgeries that people in my position could get. You can get a full proctoclectomy, which is what I got, and that is removing your colon, your large intestine, and your rectum. So, and no, it's very loosely called the Barbie butt surgery because I don't have function there anymore, and it's stitched up.
Wow.
There's also, yeah, the other option is, you know, going for a J pouch surgery where they leave your rectal stump in and they take out your large intestine. You know, down the road, you can choose to have, I don't know if it's one or two elective surgeries where they reattach everything. So you can, you know, poop normally, but with that comes a whole slew of other possible complications, because your rectal stump's still there. You still deal with inflammation. You can still have colon cancer down the road. And a lot of people have complications where, you know, in 20, 30 years, they have to end up getting everything removed anyway. So there was a lot of talking, deciding, you know, what the fuck is the best option for what I want my quality of life to look like. And so we decided, you know, with the support of my family, my friends, my husband, you know, the amazing surgeon that I had at BBH, we decided that going for the total proctoclectomy was what I wanted to do. And as we talked about, like, people with ulcerative colitis, it's a spectrum. So what's going to work the best for me is not going to work the best for the next person. You know, it might not be the best thing for them. I'm really happy that I was able to make this decision to go for this surgery where there wasn't any, there was no end game. We had tried all the drugs. The doctors were kind of waving the white flag and saying, like, we don't really have any other options other than surgery here for you. They weren't going to discharge me without having some kind of plan. Okay. I don't want to say the amazing thing, but I wasn't in a situation where my colon was perforated and I had bacteria leaking into my colon. Like, the doctors didn't make this decision for me. We made the decision when it was the right moment for us. And for that, I do feel empowered.
Yeah.
So it was a lot. It was a lot. Yeah. I mean, with another thing, I know I just keep talking about the surgery in general, but with my type 1 diabetes, like, if by any chance there was like some drugs that we could try, some steroids that we could try side of what I was offered, I'm already on, I have a terrible immune system with my diabetes. Like, I don't want to be on immunosuppressants for the rest of my life. So in terms of what I wanted my quality of life to look like, after surgery, after recovery, this was the best thing for me. And I feel very grateful that I was able to make that decision for myself, because I know a lot of, as I meet people online who have gone through the same surgery, a lot of people didn't get to make, say go. The doctors said go. They were the ones wheeling them into the emergency OR.
So why is it that you were able to make the decision and some of these folks weren't able to? How does that happen?
I believe it was because there was nothing else at the hospital that they could have offered me.
Right.
I wasn't at a point. I wasn't at a point where, like I said, there was no complications with my colitis, where I had perforation. I had in my colon. I had no leakage, but I wasn't responding well to any of the medications. So things like in my blood work, my CRP, which is your inflammation marker, every day it was just jumping up and up and up and up and up. And so there was nothing that they could do or offer to control that.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say that I made the decision to do the surgery. The doctors told me this is kind of what the plan is for you.
Right.
But I was able to, pick the surgery that I thought was going to go well with how I envisioned my quality of life going forward.
So I guess first I feel like I need to say thank you for sharing this. I have the privilege of being able to see you, and others will only get to hear you. But from watching you, you have this story in your head. You have these sequence of events, and you have these facts. And so you tell it very factual, like you are a doctor. You know the medical terms. So I'm curious for you, because I'm sitting here like, oh my, overwhelmed, because it's like, oh great, things are better, but no, they're not. It's like you're watching this movie, right? Yeah. Where now what? And so I'm curious for you, what, from a feelings place, like what emotions or feelings did you go through when you were first receiving the diagnosis? So when you first found out about this, and now you're making this decision to have this life-changing surgery, like how would you describe what you were feeling?
I think I have a tendency to put on a really strong exterior, and I think that is a result of my diabetes. And having it for 22 years, I'm no stranger to medical diagnoses. That doesn't make it okay that I've experienced all of this sequence of diagnoses.
Yeah.
It was a relief when we first initially got the diagnosis in regard to finally knowing, okay, this is what it is. We can move forward with treatment. As things got worse, you do research, as my husband and I do, and you find people on social media, you read the blogs, you watch the YouTubes, you talk to the doctors, and you see how dangerous this disease really is. And it feels, it's overwhelming because it's such a spectrum. Like if I compare my journey to my mother-in-law's journey, it's just two very different situations. If I circle back to how I was feeling, I think that it's really hard to navigate your own mental health when you are a new parent. I think that gets overshadowed by trying to figure out how to keep this child alive. You're already burnt out on top of everything else. So I think at that time it was like, okay, let's, this is just another thing. This is just another hurdle. Let's just do what we need to do to feel this and move on so I can get back home to my daughter. I think that's the only thing in my brain that kept me going.
So when you look back and talk about it, like, I'll give you an example. So, and I can't compare. However, I'm trying to understand what that would have been like. And so I feel like for many people, the pandemic is something maybe we can relate with, in terms of you put a lot of blinders on and you pause some things and you just go into sprint mode and you do what you got to do. And for everyone, that means different things, for work, for health, all sorts of things. And then now in 2023, when some of us, maybe not all of us, when some of us start to look back, it's very overwhelming. For me, I can say when I look back and think of end of 2019 to 2022, it was a very overwhelming couple of years. And I shudder sometimes when I'm like, oh my God, how did I have the ability to go with that when I was that exhausted? So I'm just trying to imagine for you now, when you look back and think about that period of your life, do you feel that overwhelmness when you look back and you think hospital and 25 times a day and, like sleeping on the floor and...
It's overwhelming. And like I said, it's almost like you don't give yourself enough credit to the extent of things that you went through.
Yeah.
I remember I woke up early on my surgery day because I wanted to do a journal entry and kind of sit and jot down my feelings about everything.
Yeah.
And looking back, I don't think obviously it's a massive, massive, massive life-changing surgery. I don't think I gave myself enough credit for going through something so immensely,
Yeah.
because it's just because of how dark things were before my surgery. It's hard to not let how amazing my life is now. Like it's hard to not let that overshadow how negative things were previously. Um, but yeah, going through for the podcast, I had a chance to like write down my entire story in detail, because I think that it's important. It's important to record something so life changing, and the emotions that went through. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like it was a lot. It was a long time. There was a lot of things, not, I'm a new mom at this point. I have some friends who are new moms as well, and
Yeah.
it's hard to explain to them the severity at that time. Like, you're texting in your mom group about I did this, and it's hard to explain to them the severity of like how fucking shitty you feel.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
So
you're hearing them talk about the things that you didn't get a chance to be part of.
I think it's just like energy levels, and I know
Yeah.
like everyone's energy levels. It's just like the mom guilt. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I should be doing this with my daughter. I'm not doing enough. I'm not teaching her out enough. But it's like
Yeah.
I physically, when she would go down for a nap, I would also need to nap.
Right.
And it like I still was exhausted after that. So I think that the mental load of being a new parent really intertwined with just like everything that was going on. And I didn't really realize it until looking back at how severe everything was.
Right. Yeah. For sure. Because in some ways you are experiencing what a new mother may go through with exhaustion, and however yours is amplified at this other level. So I would imagine that would be isolating for you, because if I was in that mom group, I wouldn't know to understand. I would be like, yeah, I get tired too. What you're describing is being tired, and yet it's not my tired to your tired. I mean, we shouldn't compare, first of all. However, it must be isolating though, because you're not in a group with moms that are also being diagnosed with colitis. So you have this extra factor you're trying to manage.
I think also, with my diabetes and having it for so long, no one's conditioned me to think this way. I just have always, I don't want to make my medical issues anybody else's problem.
Yeah.
I don't want people to feel sorry for me. So I find myself putting on a really tough face and maybe not speaking to it as authentically as like what's actually happening in the moment.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something I need to work through personally, because I often don't realize how severe things are until you're outside of it.
Yeah, your threshold is, that line in the sand, as we sometimes say, is so far out than maybe where you need it to be. And sometimes discovering that, you're like, holy crap, I probably could have paused at this point, or at this point, but also appreciate what you're saying about the tough exterior. And I get what you mean. You don't want to be a victim. You are like, I got this. But at the same time, like, you're here today and you are talking about it. And I think that's a really good sign too, that you are in your story sharing that this was a big experience. And I would imagine that there would be some grief and loss that would come with an experience such as this. And I'm curious if there are some things that after being diagnosed with colitis, after this surgery, that you are mourning or you're going through you talked a little bit about early stages of motherhood and not getting some of that. Are there other things that you've had to work through and sort of mourn that, I missed this thing, or I didn't get this thing, or I won't get that in the future?
Yeah, I think that if I look back, when I was in the hospital for that last weeks. The night actually before I was discharged, I had a complete mental breakdown. I could not stop crying, and I'm not really one to cry like that.
Yeah.
It all came down at once. The fact that I had been in the hospital for 5 weeks. I had seen my daughter less than a handful of times.
Yeah.
She was experiencing all these milestones while I wasn't at home. I felt guilty, and you almost feel like, am I being a bad mother?
Yeah.
Am I like, is she going to, like, I even had this thought that crossed my head. I'm like, is she even going to remember me as her mother when I go home?
Mm-hmm.
Are things going to be different? Is our relationship going to be different? That was really, I think, in terms of, the whole picture of things, just being a new mom and having that time away from my daughter was the most difficult part. In terms of the surgery itself, I find it's really hard to feel grief about what I went through, because I've gotten my life back. It's such a drastic change in terms of how much better I feel, how I mean, I poop in a bag. I have to empty it 2 times a day.
Sorry, I missed that. How many times a day do you have to empty it?
It really depends.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk kind of like a little bit like a doctor here. So there's, people who live with ostomy bags. They have a colostomy or an ileostomy. So the ileostomy is when your small intestine has been brought out, and that's where your output comes up from. That's what I have. So a lot of people who, have their colon removed, they'll have ileostomies. A colostomy is when your large intestine or your colon has been brought out, and that's where you poop from. So there's, diving a little deeper into like the medical terms of things. Ileostomy, people with ileostomies, their output is more watery than people with colostomies, because your large intestine absorbs water.
Right.
So I'm probably like 5 to 7 times a day. It's really dependent on what I eat and, how much water I'm drinking during the day. But it's such a flawless process. And as you can see, like, I know the viewers can't see, or the listeners can't see me right now. Like, I'm not a stranger to medical devices. I've had them almost all my life. So for me, this was just really another learning curve into, moving into living a better life.
Yeah. I want to ask you so many questions, but I'm like, I don't know if that's okay to ask too. And from a physical place, like where is the bag?
Where is the bag? It's on my abdomen. It's to the right of my belly button.
Okay. And how big is it?
So you can get different sizes. My bag itself is, I believe it's like 5 by 7. But my small intestine that comes out, that's actually called a stoma. It's probably about an inch big.
So can you see it?
Like a half. Oh yeah. Yeah. So I have to change. I change the appliance. So the bag itself, I change every 3 to 4 days.
Does it hurt when you do that?
It doesn't hurt. So if you think about I want to call it the material, but like what your cheek, the feeling of your cheek, the consistency of your cheek, that's essentially like what has been brought out.
Yeah.
And surgically stitched back on itself. And so that's where all my output comes from.
Wow. So when you're emptying that in present time, like, what are you thinking? Do you have a sense of humor with this? Do you not even think about it? Like anyone going sitting on a toilet?
I think that it is. So I want to preface this by my journey looks very different, than say an 18-year-old who has had or is going to get this surgery. You have to go through their 20s with this and maybe they have to navigate dating, school, it's like all these different things. I'm, in my 30s, I'm married. I've been with my partner for 16 years. He's seen it all. So do we joke about it? I mean, maybe this is TMI, but you don't have any control over your output. So when I change it, when I change my appliances, sometimes my body decides it wants to output. So
Oh.
the other night, I had to call him because I had to get him to hold a paper towel over my stomach because I was pooping while I was
Oh
changing
my
my
God.
appliance. And I don't think that many people can say that their partner does that for
No,
them. And
no, we can't. What is your husband's name?
his name is Gavin. He's
Gavin
a
needs like
sweetheart.
a
Yeah.
mega shout out right now because you two in there making the best of that. This is so when we go
He
back to
does it,
group,
he does it with a smile. Like
like
he
it doesn't
doesn't
phase him.
even, not at all.
Yeah,
You know,
that's it's
when I
amazing.
was in the hospital after my surgery, like he is there on the front line with the nurse, like learning how to do bag changes, learning how to clean it, doing all these things. So I want to say, like, I feel extremely blessed that I'm in this situation with a partner
Yeah,
who is so extremely supportive.
yeah.
And I think that, what makes things a bit easier. I know a lot of people might not be in the same situation. So,
Well, no, and like
there's
even when we think of grief and loss, like how you explained an 18-year-old maybe going through it versus someone in your place, and yeah, we're at such different parts of our journey in life, and that's the part where I'm like kudos to you because I could be in my 40s having to experience this and I don't know if I would be able to sit here in the way you are and the way Gavin is so open to like I get on one hand, yeah, like this is the way it is, we got to adjust, but the way that you talk about how you've adjusted is just marvelous because not to get too intimate, but I would imagine even in the bedroom and like all sorts of things, right? Like the bag is always there, it's visible. And
yeah.
so it's not like you can hide it. It's there all the time, right? And so you guys are sort of navigating this new way for the rest of your lives and again, you coming on and wanting to talk about it I think is exactly what you're hoping for, start trying to normalize it. Like I really appreciate you sort of helping me understand cuz like making sense of what someone would be going through every day when you're in the bathroom or you go to the mall and you may have to change your appliance, but
there's a, I appreciate you saying all that. In terms of, you're not the first person to say to me, I wouldn't be able to talk about it like you are, or I wouldn't be able to adjust how well you have. And I think that if people were in the same situation, you just gotta roll with it. And maybe I have a better attitude than other people, but like it's hard, I think, to speak about a situation unless you're in it. Like unless you're in a sink or swim
yeah.
kind of situation. It's just been, yeah, no, that's fine. It's been crazy.
Has this change in your life impacted your relationships with others in any way?
I don't think so. I would say that it really strengthened a lot of my close friendships because they were so supportive during this whole time as well. I couldn't lift my daughter for like 8 weeks post-op because, they caution about you don't want to get a hernia and especially with your abdomen being so the muscles being so poor that's quite common for a lot of
Yeah.
people. So
Yeah.
I had my girlfriends come over and my husband was out for whatever reason and they would come over and help me with the baby. So it strengthened a lot of relationships, I think.
Sounds like you have a really strong network around you, which is really
Yeah,
reassuring to hear.
absolutely.
Do you feel like
Yeah.
that sort of helped empower your want to be as open as you have been? I mean, I know you've been open with me, and so I would imagine we don't know each other, so I would imagine with people around
Yeah,
you,
absolutely.
do you openly talk about do people feel comfortable asking you about it, or do you kind of bring it into the room, or what do you do?
I I love talking about it. I want people to see what is going on. I know a lot of people don't get the surgery because of the vanity aspect of the bag.
Yeah.
It's not like it's pretty. But I think it is, I'm the type of person that you ask me about what's that on your arm? Oh, it's my insulin pump and this is like what I have and this is how it helps me live my life. And
Mm-hmm.
I I really authentically love educating people about medical issues. I think it's really important to bring some normalcy to these
Mm-hmm.
life-saving medical devices. I love answering questions about it. I will show people if they ask. Yeah, I think it's important because, I think being not ashamed, but scared to talk to people or doctors about poop and like blood or some abnormalities
Yeah.
that maybe things would have gotten diagnosed a little quicker.
Yeah.
So I think being open about it is extremely important.
Is there something that you would suggest to folks listening today about that? Something in hindsight that you think, oh, okay, had I paid attention to this or had I thought about that when it comes to those embarrassing parts of our body that we try to normalize in our own heads, saying, oh, it's fine, or I'll just deal with it. What would you say to folks about that?
I would say don't Google your symptoms. We're talking more on a lighter note. But I would say go to the doctor immediately. You know your body better than anybody else does. I feel like we always have an inkling that something is wrong, and
Hmm.
it isn't until we go to the doctor, things get prolonged. We know our body best. The
Yeah,
doctors aren't going to be able to tell us how we feel. We have to advocate for ourselves and tell them how we feel.
totally. I just want to go back to earlier. You were talking about the day of your surgery, you had journaled. And I think that's really cool. What prompted you or sort of made you do that? Where'd you get that idea from?
I felt like the 3 weeks, like at that point, I'd been in the hospital for 3 weeks, and I felt that things had happened really quickly in
Hmm.
terms of, all these different diagnoses, the medications that weren't working. And I felt like I hadn't checked in with myself in a while. There was a lot going on, and I just didn't feel grounded. It's really
Hmm.
hard to feel grounded when you're in a hospital and there's cold blues going on and people are screaming and there's buzzers going off. And it just, I didn't feel like I was in my own head, if that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah,
like I didn't feel right. And so I really wanted to check in with myself and remember exactly how I was feeling in the moment before such a massive life change.
right. How are you feeling in that moment?
Looking back, I was stoked. I was stoked because with this surgery, I ultimately, like, I don't have ulcerative colitis anymore.
Yeah.
In my head, I was looking like 5 steps ahead. I wasn't looking at the recovery. I wasn't looking at the surgery itself. I just kept telling myself if I can get through, the next couple of weeks, long term, I'm going to be living this marvelous life, and I'm, going to be not feeling the way that I was feeling the last couple of months. So
Yeah.
that's really what I have been looking forward to.
I just again think it's amazing that you thought to do that and you checked in with yourself. I almost hear you saying like you were sort of grounding yourself in a moment of where am I? How am I doing? And you talked a lot about mom guilt too, about trying to be present without being present for your daughter and probably for your husband too. And so it makes sense how you could lose yourself and now you're trying to survive and here you are. And in many ways, even today when you talk, I hear sort of like the theme of storytelling, and I feel storytelling heals. It allows us to share our experiences in the way that you have been, recognize emotions, honor struggles, and how beautifully you said, even like creating this connection, understanding of what's happening for us. And so, in what ways would you say sharing your story, talking about it, educating people, as you've said, has played a role in your healing process?
I think it's important to myself to share the story. I hope that it touches and resonates with someone who, is going through the same thing and, is thinking about surgery, but they have these misconceptions in their head about, I'm going to be self-conscious. My life, is going to change because I have this bag. I genuinely feel that, this happened to me so I can share my story, and hopefully it helps somebody become more confident. Hopefully it touches on someone who gets educated about how amazing these bags are. I talk about that, but that's my personal thoughts are like, it's changed my life immensely. And so
Yeah.
if I can share that story, change someone else's life, like that's huge.
I feel like you're a creative arts person, so maybe there's like something in there about designing some cool bags. Like, is that even possible? Could you do that?
Oh,
Right? And like sell them on Etsy or something?
yeah. I actually bought a few bag covers. So the bag covers itself, people sell them,
See?
and I
There
bought
you
some
go.
like
People are
pretty
already
thick
doing
ass
it.
ones for the yeah. I bought some pretty thick ass ones for the summer. That match with my bathing suit.
Oh,
So
see? Oh,
that's
bathing
another
suit.
thing. Yeah,
Okay. So,
yeah.
yes, you're gonna go for it. Wear the bathing suit.
Oh yeah, yeah. I like I said before, I think it's really important to have these things visible to show people, but also my daughter that body image is such a self valuable thing. Like it's okay that your body doesn't look like what's on the internet, or doesn't look like Kim Kardashian. Like our bodies have served us; they've gone through a lot. Like
Hmm.
we're strong individuals, and if you have some inconsistencies with your body compared to the next person, like that's okay. So I think there's also a lot of teachable moments I have that I'm excited to share with my daughter, and will be that role model to show her what a independent and resilient woman looks like.
Yeah, I think well said. Honestly, for we talk about body image on this show, and I think those of us that are willing to start talking about it really have to thank folks like you that paved the way. And again, go back to that word that you had shared, normalizing. I can't tell you I've ever seen anyone out there in a bathing suit wearing a bag, and so for anyone out there that wears one to see you out there doing that, I know if that was me, I'd be like, oh my gosh, she's actually doing that. That's okay. That's amazing. That would open a door for me in some way, if not to encourage me to want to go do that. And I think we're in this part of the world where there's some wonderful, brave folks like you that are willing to put that out there. And you make a really good point. You have a daughter as well, and so this is you're right. And as you say, an opportunity to role model and teach her how you're not any less beautiful or any less woman because you're, like you said, you don't look like a Kardashian. Kudos to you for that. And I hope you like post those pictures on social media and they get out there, because we need to see more things like that out there that are about everyday living and not this fake vacation living body mode that we're conditioned to think we're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to have.
Yeah, my body's been through the fucking ringer the last year. Like I was pregnant, had a C-section, now this surgery. So, as like moms, like we have some pretty powerful battle scars,
Yeah.
that need to be normalized.
Yes, I know. I was talking to a friend the other day who's like, I feel like the high-waisted bathing suit is kind of going out. So she's like, I'm getting the regular, bikini, whatever. And I was like, I and all the moms out there will never let a high-waisted bathing suit go out of style because, like you said, there's a lot of battle wounds and it doesn't look like how the media keeps projecting it should look, or some women can make look. Most of our bodies after having babies don't look that way, and let alone, like you said, wearing a bag. There's lots of parts of your body in the story of your history you get to share out there, and I again appreciate that because I never could. I'm working on it slowly for sure. It's like, oh, I better put my money where my mouth is now, like I'm talking about body image. I got to like also do this too. But for folks like you that aren't even like thinking twice about it, thank you for that, because we need that.
Important.
Yeah, right. So I was going to also ask you for, kind of like talking about stories. What is your hope today in terms of sharing your story? Like, what do you really hope comes out of today for you?
I think that I've been super lucky that you invited me on the podcast to be able to share my story, and that is a piece of my healing journey, is being able to share the story with so many other people. But also, I really hope that people who listen to this take away that it's important to keep pushing for your own like advocacy. You know, it's okay to get a third or second or third or fourth opinion, you know, from doctors. They don't owe you anything. You can go to a different doctor. You know, you're allowed to make decisions for yourself. In terms of my surgery, they had slotted me in for, you know, the J pouch surgery, and I had asked the surgeon, well, is this my decision, or like, do I have to get this surgery? And they said, no, you can choose whatever, you know, if you want to go for the full removal, that's totally up to you. And so at that point, you know, that's when I decided I wanted to go for the full removal. But just medical advocacy in itself is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And like we said at the beginning of the episode too, in a time where your lab work and your referral can easily be lost or misplaced or pushed back on the wait list, and the squeaky wheel sort of mentality is, like you said, you got to call. And I think it's sad in some ways that we have to do it. And for folks like you that are coming on and talking about how impactful that is, I appreciate that, because I would imagine there's so many people out there that are just so overwhelmed by their medical journey, their illness, and it just fogs it. It paralyzes you, gets in the way of picking up that phone and calling that specialist over and over and not letting them forget you. So for those folks out there, what would you encourage them to do, or maybe keep doing, or what would you say to them?
I would say that, you know, just keep pushing. I would say that taking your health into your own hands is ultimately extremely empowering. We only have one life. I know it sounds pretty deep, but we literally only have one life to live.
Yeah.
And you can't let people who, you know, these doctors' offices are probably using a fax machine to fax blood work and requisitions over. Like, how we can't rely. We need to take action into our own hands. And as you said, we're really lucky in North America that we have access to all of these doctors and specialists, because a lot of other countries, they don't have this, you know, they don't even have that opportunity. So, you know, like we said, the medical professionals, they're amazing, but there's something with the system that is broken.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned self-advocacy earlier, and a lot of what you're talking about just now is describing self-advocacy. So I'm curious, has the meaning of what is self-advocacy changed since your journey with being diagnosed with colitis?
I think so. I think the first time that we were turned away from Research Hospital, and we kind of recounted what we could have and should have said or asked of the doctor, I think that was the point where we realized like what it truly means to advocate for yourself. And that's, you know, asking the questions, doing your research, you know, taking all these steps to take your health into your own hands ultimately.
Yeah. And again, sharing your story and storytelling in the way that you are, I think it is another example of how to advocate when folks like you can talk to us about what you went through. It also educates us on to think, okay, should something happen, or I'm in the midst of a medical issue, I got to figure out how to ask for help if it's hard to advocate for yourself. You had incredible people like your husband Gavin supporting you along the way and fighting for you. And you know, there's folks out there that may not have that. And so I'm curious if you know, or did you utilize any other resources during the time? And I mean, I don't know if there's maybe a gap with resources as well for folks, I would imagine too.
I think I surrounded myself, while I was in the hospital, I surrounded myself with a lot of people on social media that had gone through surgeries that were similar to mine. A large portion of those people were people who, you know, were from the UK, which I don't know if it's just like not as, people don't talk about it as much over here, but there were some really, really, really inspiring social media personalities that I was following. And it's, you know, these people were still living their lives. They, you know, one of the women, she's going through pregnancy right now. So she's sharing her entire story about how living with ileostomy and kind of interacts with her pregnancy.
Yeah.
So, I think in Vancouver itself, I haven't been able to find a core group of people. I believe they did give me some resources at the hospital, but when I went to go reach out to them, I believe the group had folded. There's, a couple of Facebook groups that I'm a part of, which have been really helpful in terms of just overall questions, because these people have had, these has had these surgeries forever. So they can offer a really, really great expertise, and suggestions. And it's not gonna, you can't blanket fix everything, but hearing people speak from their experiences is very helpful. So I would say anyone who's going through any kind of medical situation, find internet's a great place. You can really find people going through the same thing and surround yourself with that.
That's really well said, Mel. I think, again, it doesn't have to be here. We do have technology on our side. So kudos to the UK is always doing something good and ahead of us, with whether it's with their mental health benefits, even to have a group like this, I think, great. Like, you can connect with people that may not be in your own area, but as well across the world. And humans are humans. So whether you're experiencing something overseas or not, you know what pain is like for you mentally and physically. And to talk about that, I think, can definitely encourage other people to also, like you said, feel like they're normalizing it. Also, sometimes we just, your story too is a good reminder, like, we can't control so much in our environment, let alone when we have these medical issues happening. And those things are the things we try to grab and try to fix. And you talked a lot about, okay, what can my husband and I do here? What are our options? You talked about taking care of your daughter. So how can you respond to that? How can you guys still provide her healthy first year of post-birth? And I think it's a good reminder of what are the things that I can be in charge of versus the things that are out of my control. And I commend you and Gavin for that as well, because you want to be 10 steps ahead, but sometimes you can't even be one step ahead. So kudos to you guys to sort of slow down as well as you were going through that process. And again, good reminder about social media can be helpful. It's not always a bad place. So it's good to hear. Yeah, right. To get the talks out and the groups out. And so, like, you also talked a lot about parenting. So what is something that you've learned about yourself as a mother that maybe you wouldn't have learned about having gone through this medical process?
I think that, I learned after all this, patience with my daughter, patience, understanding it. We go out for walks in the morning, and just that's something that I wasn't able to do before. Because I was so exhausted, and B, I was rushing to and from the washroom. So just simple things, going for these walks in the morning with my daughter, and we stop and look at the birds. We look at the flowers, and watching her just interact with all of these things. It's something that I think pre-surgery I would have just been looking forward to her next nap time. So So able to be so present with her in this new journey of her facing everything. It's amazing.
Yeah, I like that. I appreciate that you've been able to slow down a bit and be present, because you missed that as well. You talked about how you weren't able to. So that's nice that you're able to maybe not get that time back, but as you move forward, take the time with her. And, babies are resilient too. And if you are as tough as you are as the parents of this baby, I'm sure genetically she's coming in with a lot of resiliency. So also be kind to yourselves as well. Like, you do the best you can. It's what I've been learning every single day since I've been a mom, is you do the best you can and till you know better. And when you know better, you do better. And even then you could been better. So I think sometimes we have to just get these things off of our chest to say, I feel guilty, as you talked about today. Then again, I can't control some of those things, but I know I can be aware and in charge of the feelings that I'm going through. So I can't thank you guys enough as well about how you guys have managed that. So I hope you and your husband have that kind of validation for each other as well. You guys killed this whole process.
I appreciate appreciate that. I think going back to, comparing yourselves to like, oh, what else should I have done in motherhood?
Yeah.
And that guilt.
Mm-hmm.
I read this thing on the internet the other day, and it was this practice where you have these intrusive thoughts and you just say, you know what, I'm not entertaining that thought today.
Mm-hmm.
And that really stuck with me because I think we so often spend time comparing our lives and what our lives look like to somebody else's, that we don't see the full spectrum or the full picture. And
Yeah.
so it's really easy to fall into that spiral. And so that just really, really resonated and stuck with me to just tell myself, obviously easier said than done, but I am not entertaining that thought.
Totally. What would like today mom you go back and tell 9 months ago, year ago mom you while you were going through the process and feeling that guilt?
Yeah, I mean, just take it day by day.
Yeah.
If you don't do this one thing with your daughter, you're not a bad mom.
Yeah.
Or you're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to let yourself feel exhausted. You don't have to push yourself and burn out.
Mm-hmm.
Be gentle with yourself.
It's like this North American way. We have so much to offer to our kids and it becomes paralyzing. And sometimes we have to simplify it. She has love. She has food. She has 2 healthy parents. And sometimes you have to just sort of put those things in perspective because we always feel like we are expected to do more. And you see the people that can do so much and you think, oh gosh, why am I not? But I think there's a lot more of us in this boat that you're talking about where you want to do more, but there's exhaustion, there's all these things. And again, the more we talk about it, the way we normalize what good basic parenting is compared to this super mom that we're somehow again trained to think that we're supposed to be. And she's getting everything she needs, and I think clearly as that's all you guys thought about when you were going through your health issues, right? How is she taken care of? When is it the best time to go and get this treatment? Yeah. So I'm going to ask you at this point, is there anything that you wish I had asked or that you wanted to talk about as you share your story?
I think that you've asked a lot of very valuable questions, and I hope that you asking questions specifically in regards to my stoma and my bag and kind of how that operates, I hope that that's useful to people to create some education and some narrative around it, because I bet that everybody knows somebody with a bag. They just, have never really been upfront with it. So I appreciate you asking those questions.
Could I have asked to see it? Would you have shown it to me? Would you show it to me?
I totally would have shown it to you. I'm wearing a romper right now. Oh. So unless you want a full...
I get the money shot.
Yeah. But absolutely. Like I don't shy away from that at all if I can show it. I feel like I when I have the opportunity to tell people this story, they kind of stand back a little bit with their jaw open because it's quite intense and it sounds very crazy. And I just want people to know that it was, for me personally, like I can't speak for everyone, like it was a surgery that changed my life completely for the better. And something I would tell people is just ask questions. Don't pretend it's not there. Ask questions. Don't feel nervous about it. Don't feel awkward about it. We all poop. Like it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you were so open with me too. You kept saying at one point, I know this is too much information. And in my head, I'm like, gosh, no, I'm glad because you don't know where to ask. You don't want to offend and you also want to protect people's privacy. And so in a lot of ways, I'm not privy to all of that info. However, I like how you put it that if this education is going to help normalize this and help put a voice behind colitis and other medical illnesses that impact us. You also share type 1 diabetes. And so there are thousands and so many of these illnesses out there that more people are living with, like you said, than not. And yet, I can't even tell you that I know anything about diabetes either. And so it is helpful to think about these kinds of questions. And I honestly think for you again, that you got this creative thing to you. It'd be really cool to for you to start some kind of your own group or education on social media, because I'd follow you. I'd appreciate that, and it might open the door for others. And not to put you on the spot, but I'm just saying you
watch out for the merch line dropping soon.
what would the merch line be? Yeah. Oh shit.
I haven't got that far yet. I do want to preface though that, maybe not everyone's going to be comfortable as I am talking about it. So I'm happy to be that voice, to create that narrative around something like this. I think, I have gone through all this shit in my life. I think that could be one of my life purposes, is to, speak up for people who don't necessarily feel comfortable for it.
Yeah. I mean, you guys figured out a way to advocate and have that voice. And I do believe, and that's part of this platform of the show, is like healing through stories. And you're right. A lot of us aren't maybe going to feel comfortable, but I think that goes to say with a lot of things in life, and in many ways we've operated that way for years. I don't feel comfortable at it, so we don't talk about it. However, it still impacts us. So not talking about it isn't necessarily helping us too, because we're talking about it in our head all day. We're thinking about it in many ways. We're feeling it. And so I think push the envelope, man. Get that shit out.
Literally.
And maybe that's what you call it. Let that shit out. I don't know. But I think if you found some sort of solace and some kind of help with the UK group, then who knows, maybe there's something to be said about locally in BC for you to start something like that. So just something, yeah. It's my call to action for you.
Who knows what the future holds?
Yeah, you're right. As you've talked about this whole time, like I'm sure when you got pregnant and then you had your baby, like I'm sure you weren't expecting any of these sorts of things, right? Like this isn't how you envisioned it was going to go.
Not at all. Not at all. But you just roll with it, and that's what we've been doing. We just roll with it. It's just you adapt.
Yeah. And as you adapt, I think there's also space to process and talk about what that's like, because sometimes, we have no choice. We got to do it, but we can still talk about how it sucks and how hard it is and how rough it is. And that's really cool that day that you chose to journal. So I think that would be really neat in the moment if you were to continue to capture that, or snapshots of your journey. So So speaking of call to action, I'm curious if you can help me at this point, and for our listeners, if there's something that maybe people that are supporting someone with colitis or a medical illness, or people that are experiencing it, what is something that you would have found helpful for you when you were going through your journey that maybe people can think about or people can go and do?
Just listen. Be there for support. I was extremely lucky that I had such a strong support group that, did check in with me when I felt like I needed to vent. They listened. I had one of my girlfriends, she came visit me post-op, and it was when the nurse came in to change my bag, and she was there watching the whole thing. She wanted, ask me questions too. So just be there as support. I think knowing it makes it easier going through something so life-changing when you have those people around you.
Yeah, that's very well said. I appreciate that. Thank you for that. I also want to thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. I know your husband wasn't here, but please thank him too, because he's a really good role model for supporters, people that are in his position that are helping a loved one. And so maybe there's a time and place for him to come on and share his portion of the journey as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
I commend him all the time, because it wasn't, it's not easy to be driving from Tsawwassen to Vancouver every single day, and navigate childcare as well. And I commend him a lot just for being there as a support. And he still to this day just says, "Well, I just drove back and forth from the hospital. It was fine."
Yeah.
I'm like, no, you're down.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm sure it also gave him bonding time as well. I mean, there's always a silver lining in that. So maybe he got some kind of special time with her that he wouldn't have gotten,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like, I can't speak for every kind of family dynamic, but what I'm assuming is a lot of
partners don't get that experience in that first year of life to have that one-on-one time with their child. And just watching their relationship, it just warms my heart.
Yeah.
They have the cutest, most special bond. And I don't know if I was in the hospital if they would have gotten to have that. And he also got to learn how to parent on his own time. Like he did nap times. He, did everything himself. So that was huge. I didn't have to help him navigate that.
Yeah, they had to figure it out, right? And kudos to them, both of them as well. So I'm going to say thank you for you coming on and chatting with me tonight. I also want to just reach out to our listeners and thank you for listening as well. As you know, I always say at this point, these conversations are door openers. So if you have any feedback for us about this topic and this conversation we had, or any future topics, please go ahead and reach us on Instagram at MFU Podcast or via email info@mfupodcast.com. Again, Mel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen.